What we do in life, it goes in eternity.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
These guys are hammers, and to hammers everything looks like nails.
I heard that.
You were meant to. So you see something that's important, you call it out, and we'll make it happen.
Okay. Mother Nature is a serial killer. No one's better, more creative. Like all serial killers, she can't help the urge to want to get caught. What good are all those brilliant crimes if no one takes the credit? So she leaves crumbs. Now the hard part is seeing the crumbs for the clues they are. Sometimes the thing you thought was the most brutal aspect turns out to be the chink in its armor, and she loves disguising her weaknesses as strengths.
If you can fight, fight.
Head north if you can. Hello? Is there anyone out there hearing this?
Help each other.
Mexico City has been declared a complete loss.
Be prepared for anything. Our war has just begun.
We are the hammers, and we are the nails. The world stands upon the precipice of total insanity, and we need you, and we hope you need us, bringing information, news, and as much truth as we can eke out before Mother Nature turns us to crumbs. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, working to become millions of voices singing in unison to bring the sanity back home.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Did you ever feel that things were not quite right? That everything was just ever so slightly askew?
Do you have, to paraphrase Morpheus, a splinter in your mind?
If you're interested in hearing the latest information about UFOs, the paranormal,
ancient cultures and structures,
monatomic elements,
longevity,
fantastic discoveries in science,
downloaded to your brain,
then tune into us. Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mackie.
And we are Shiny Side Out, Sundays 2 to 4 a.m. Eastern. See you then.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here. Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk Now Radio, listener-supported radio, where no topic is taboo. Brought to you by Revolution Radio, which is also listener-supported radio, where information never sleeps. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is going to be Paul Craig Roberts. We're going to be discussing his latest book out, How America Was Lost. And this is a subject I thought was really going to be useful and needed around this here time, because every day I'm on Facebook, you see nothing but posts about, police state, police brutality, corrupt government and stuff of that nature. So it seems to be an ongoing issue, if I gathered what his book was about correctly. So I thought it would be something useful for us to talk about. Paul, how you doing today?
I'm just fine, Royce.
Okay.
How are you?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good, as long as we can make it through the, show without any more disconnects there going on. I do want to tell everybody, including you, Paul, that unfortunately, my yard man just happened to arrive to cut the grass when it was time to start the show, so we're going to hear that in the background, and I do apologize, but I think he's almost through. Aside from that, if anybody wants to call in, the number's 347-688-2902, but please, if you call in, keep your questions kind of brief and short, because Paul's only got like 30 minutes to share with us today, so we're going to try to squeeze in as much as we can. So, Paul, why don't you first tell us, what was your motivation in writing the book?
Well, Royce, it's kind of hard to sit here and watch you lose your country. I mean, it's not as obvious to most people as if, for example, it was being overrun by a foreign military, but it's the same thing. It's just as serious, maybe more. What is America? If you think about it, it's the Constitution, because that's what defines us. And that's what establishes the relationship between the people and the government. And it's what makes law a shield of the people instead of a weapon in the hands of the government. So if you lose the Constitution, you've lost the country. And we're losing the Constitution. In fact, it's lost.
Actually, it's funny you should mention that, and please pardon my cutting in on you like that. You just brought to mind that I saw just today on Facebook where a guy went to complain about his Constitution being violated to a police officer, the sheriff's department or whatever it was, and the guy told him, well, Obama doesn't obey the Constitution, so I'm not going to do it either. So it kind of goes along to confirming what you're just saying.
Right. Well, it started, I think, with Clinton, when he decided to attack Serbia, which was an illegal war crime. And then, of course, under the George W. Bush regime, it was brutal. The assault on the Constitution was brutal. That's when they got rid of habeas corpus, which means the government can't arrest you and hold you without evidence presented to a court, that you can't be indefinitely detained unless you're convicted and sentenced by a judge. In other words, that's the protection from being treated like somebody in the Middle Ages, where the feudal lord could just pick you up and throw you in the dungeon, and that was the end of it. We lost that to President George W. Bush and his regime. We also lost due process, where they have to follow procedures if they're going to interfere with your rights in any way. We lost for people that they demonize by calling them a terrorist or something or the other. They lose their access to lawyers. So, and to trials, and then they create new kangaroo courts to try the people that they know regular courts won't convict. Well, all of this is tyranny. It's what the Founding Fathers created the Constitution to save us from. And this is what George W. Bush brought back in spades And of course, Obama, when he got in, instead of holding the Bush regime accountable for its crimes against the Constitution, added to them. And Obama said, look, I not only can pick you up and throw you in prison the rest of your life and never even bother to tell the judge, and you'll never see a jury or a lawyer, I can kill you with no consequences. I can just have you assassinated and killed, and all I have to do is say that somebody in my government suspects that you might have been involved with terrorists. And I don't have to show any evidence of that.
Wow.
So I can say it about anybody. So there's never been any people in the world who were in a less protected position than Americans are today.
Now, one of the things I want to mention here is what you said about Clinton and Serbia. What Clinton did, would that be considered a war crime?
I think it's a war crime because he attacked a country that was not at war with us, it was not threatening us, it had done nothing to us. It was a country that was undergoing dissident groups trying to separate various provinces, like the Russian territories in Ukraine are doing today. And of course, we're not supporting them. We're saying, oh, they're terrorists, attack them. Well, when Serbia was undergoing the same thing, we decided to attack the Serbian government. And then we paid several $100 million to the government to turn over the president who was trying to protect his country to us, and we sent him off to try him as a war criminal. But it was Clinton that was bombing passenger trains. He even bombed the Chinese embassy in Serbia. So the war crime, in my view, was the unprovoked American aggression. And according to the Nuremberg Standard, which the United States established when it tried Germany after World War II, when it tried members of the German government and military as war criminals, the basis for the trial was that Germany had committed unprovoked aggression. Well, that's what the United States has done against Serbia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Somalia, and wanted to do against Iran, and may yet do against Russia.
So basically, for the last three presidents, and to my knowledge, the last three presidents have ran the full 8-year term. Our last three 8-year term presidents have been war criminals then.
Right. That's my opinion.
And this is not just Republican or Democrat, because two Democrats did it and one Republican. So we're talking something that's not relegated by say a religious factor or something like that, then, aren't we?
Right. It's just the arrogance and hubris that comes out of the neoconservative movement that claims that the United States is the exceptional, indispensable country. Well, that's what the Nazis said about Germany. And if you're the exceptional and the indispensable, that means everybody else is unexceptional and dispensable. And so you can just run roughshod over them.
Well, wasn't this also a Jewish mindset?
It's the same mindset that Israel takes toward Palestine.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So it seems to be a recurring mindset going on in more than one area here, in other words.
Well, anytime, Germany, the Bush and Obama administration, and the attitude of Israel toward the Palestinians, or the Israeli government. Not all the Israelis agree with it, and of course not all Americans agree with Bush and Obama. But the governments who are in power have this attitude, and the assumption then is that whatever we do is okay because we're exceptional and indispensable, and we're above the law, and therefore we're not bound by law, domestic or international. because we're chosen by history in some way, and therefore law doesn't interfere with us. This is the attitude. It's dangerous because it always leads to war, provokes war, produces aggression, and that is the situation that we're in. And in the meanwhile, we've lost the protection of law because they've destroyed the Constitution.
Yeah, and from what I heard tell, the citizens are just as open to being arrested and, indefinitely incarcerated with no kind of trial as anybody else is. They, like you said, just on the suspicion alone.
Suspicion, right, that's it. Now, it doesn't mean they're applying it in any widespread way, but it means they can if they want to. And so it means that they can control dissent and dissenters. And so the ability to speak out against them is probably going to come to a halt at some time in the future, because they're going to. It's very hard to bring something like this in all at once. It has to kind of creep in. First you say, we only
brought it in at once, you'd have an open revolt.
Right. So what you do, you say, look, we're using it only against these dangerous enemies. And then you say, some of these Americans are aiding and abetting these enemies, and so we're using it against them.
Well, isn't it? I'm sorry, I didn't realize you.
Well, what the next stage, Royce, is then they say, any critic of the government is aiding and abetting, and so dissent disappears. And then the fourth stage is when somebody in power decides they want your wife or your girlfriend or your house, and they come in and say, okay, you did it, you're out of here. So then it becomes used by people in power to take what they want.
Yeah. I was just thinking what you were saying about they do it a little bit at a time, and I recognize this feature in more areas than just the everyday freedoms you're talking about, like the freedom to speak out. For example, back in, I think it was like the 70s, when the first school shooting made the big news, I think it was Columbine High, many schools here in Houston started a zero-tolerance policy, which at the time seemed beneficial, seemed benign. And if you look at it now today, it's developed from the innocent little, we're protecting everybody from another school shooting, to kids being arrested for making a Pop-Tart look like a gun, or for back-talking, or the kind of stuff that we would have never been picked up for or ticketed for, in other words.
Yeah, right. I mean, if they just draw a picture of a gun on a doodling, or they draw a picture of a fighter plane or a battleship or whatever, they can be picked up and thrown out. There are cases of girls who were helping their parents move from one house to the other, and they got to go to school, and in the back of their car is a bunch of household utensils, including a knife. And so even though they're in the process of moving, the stuff's locked up in the car in the parking lot. The campus cop goes by and sees a knife in the floor with the forks and spoons, and the girl gets thrown out of school. Yeah, it's like you say. That's the way it happens. It starts off.
CPS, they started out innocent and benign, and look what they've grown into. I heard a lot about some of the horror stories where they're involved as well. It's like everything that started out innocent and helpful has ended up corrupt within a few years, in other words. Exactly.
That's exactly the case. I mean, in the last couple of weeks, I've seen several things that people send to me. Well, in one case, the father went to the police station to pay a parking ticket. And his two kids didn't want to get out of the car, and they sat in the car, so he got arrested for child abuse, and they put the kids in Child Protective Service. And the mother went to, a convenience store to get a thing of milk, and her 9-year-old daughter says, "Mommy, I don't want to go in the store, I'll just wait here." And she gets arrested, and the child is snatched. Well, these are absurdities. And that is an absurdity. They can't holler child neglect when a 9-year-old knows how to open a door, get out, and go in if she gets hot. Right. But you see, the law is always expanded to the fullest possible extent, and so child abuse becomes whatever excuse the arresting officer wants to make.
So things that are really originally started to be helpful, corrupt people get in there and exploit it over time to turn it into their own needs and gains. Because, I mean, let's face it, somewhere down the line is making money off of kids that are being paid for the care of CPS, in other words.
Yeah, right. Well, just imagine, how many times were you on a road trip with your parents when you were a child, and they come to a filling station, and your dad gets out and he pumps gas in the car, and he says stay in the car, and he goes into the men's room to take a leak. Well, you could have been seized. He'd be arrested. In other words, it makes life impossible for people.
Yeah, I can see that.
Every time you got to go to the service station's restroom on a trip, you're going to take all the kids in there in these tiny little dirty rooms? You can't do that. There's no room for them.
Yeah, then what happens if you get a kid like me that you take them to church with you, and halfway through the sermon, they get bored, they go outside and sit in the car, and they fall asleep out there, and a cop comes along and sees a kid out in the
right.
car that, well, the dads were probably up there preaching or in the choir and didn't see the kid leave, in other words.
Right. It's all of that. All of that happens. And then also, of course, the way they train the police now, Royce, they're trained that the public is an enemy and that they must take no risk with the public. So you don't ever politely ask a question in order to try to find out what might have happened. In other words, used to, if the police were involved in something, they'd be asking you questions and they'd be trying to get a picture of what the situation is. Well, now they're told you just use force, like in the military. You go in, you give orders, you handcuff them behind their back, you handcuff the hands behind their back, you carry them to the police station, and now we'll question them. And if they resist, it means that they're dangerous. Mace them, taser them, shoot them if you have to. So you get all these people constantly brutalized and murdered who haven't done anything. But it's because of the way they train the police is you mustn't take any risk with yourself. You are so precious, but the public ain't precious. So you can do whatever you want to them. Just be sure that nothing happens to you. So when they're trained that way, particularly if the force attracts bullies who like to use power, then they have carte blanche. They can do whatever, they can have a great time beating up kids, women, old people. And so that's why we have so many instances now of police brutality.
And of course, for 90% of everything that's going on today, there's been somewhere down the road a reason to make an amendment to the Constitution to cover it because we as the public were doing something illegal that made it necessary. Or, I mean, I know that they do these kind of thing all the time. They even arrange false flags just so they can do it, in other words.
Well, false flags, they use those to implement an agenda that
right,
public
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like if you want to take away a person's rights as a parent, you create a false flag where there's an excessive amount of child abuse that's getting out of control, and you can change amendments concerning parental rights and amend it. If there's anything in the Constitution about it, I don't know or not, but I'm just saying it would make an example if there was. And then after it's amended, you can start exploiting it later on down the road, in other words.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why the War on Terror, which I think was a false flag, it created the ability for them to destroy the Constitution because they said, well, we have to do all this to protect you from terrorists. And nobody thought, well, what that means is we'll be at your mercy. And who's the greatest threat to me? Some terrorist overseas or my own government? And the Founding Fathers said that your government is the greatest threat. And that's why they built the system the way that they did, and that's why the system has been dismantled eventually by the government. And so all those patriotic people who lined up for the war on terror, they played a decisive role in destroying liberty in the United States.
Of course, they didn't know they were doing it when they done it.
Right, they didn't know. Right, I don't mean they did it on purpose, but they just didn't think. They're not. See, Americans aren't really trained in the Constitution, and they don't understand that what patriotism is respect for the Constitution, not respect for the government. Because the government, see, the oath of allegiance is that I will protect the Constitution, not the government, the Constitution of the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic. And domestic means the government.
Yeah.
That's the oath I had to take when I was appointed by Reagan. It's the oath the military has to take. It's the oath the president has to take when he's sworn in.
I had to take it when I joined the Marine Corps.
Right, Marines have to take it, right. And
let me ask you a question, and I apologize again, but basically, can you actually make amendments to the Constitution and protect it at the same time?
Yeah. The way they get around the Constitution is not by amending it, it's by passing laws that are unconstitutional. And so the only way you can challenge them is to get a court to accept that you have standing to challenge the law. And what the courts usually do is say you don't have standing. And so the way they get around the Constitution is with laws like the Patriot Act and the National Defense Authorization Act, the various kinds of acts that the Bush regime passed and the Obama regime renewed. So they use law to subvert the constitutional protections.
But in so doing, aren't they making laws that are unconstitutional? And can they legally do that?
Well, they can pass whatever law they want. It's like I say, the only way you can get the law overturned is to bring a constitutional case in court. And we have seen in a number of these instances where the federal district judges will rule against the law. But then it goes to the appeal courts, the federal appeal courts. And usually they're more political, and they're put there because they're more political. And they usually overturn the lower court's ruling. And sometimes it gets to the Supreme Court. But so far, the Supreme Court has upheld almost all of the unconstitutional laws. And I think what's made it easy, of course, easier than it usually is the so-called war on terror, because they've created this atmosphere in which what they're doing is not aimed at Americans, it's aimed at these Muslim terrorists that everybody's been taught to hate. So if you think that this is not affecting Americans, just those dastardly, demonized, hateful Muslims, then you don't worry about it. And so the people get fooled. They've been fooled and deluded. And this happens because they're gullible in part. This happens because they are unaware of the processes, how these things happen. It's not taught to them. They're not on their guard. And so it's easy for the government to take away their rights.
Okay, I show that we got 2 minutes left. Actually, I'm going to be on the air live for another hour and a half, but I remember you told me you only had 30 minutes, and I don't want to tie up your time knowing you're really busy, although I wouldn't mind keeping you a little longer. But real quick, like in the chat rooms, Monkey asked, if you have no standing, how can the law apply to you?
Well, what the lack of standing means is if you go to court and you say, okay, this law is taking away my constitutional right to do this, that, and the other, then the judge can rule, well, look, you have you been picked up and thrown into prison? No. Have you been tortured? No. Well, then, what is the basis for your complaint? Nothing has happened to you. And you say, well, it hasn't happened to me yet, but they're taking away my rights, so it can happen to me. And the judge said, well, but it hasn't, and so you have no standing. In other words, they rig it so that until you're waterboarded or put in jail where you would have no access to the court because you're in detention, they don't have any access to the court. In other words, until you're tortured and released, or you're in indefinite detention, you've got no standing. But when you're in that situation, you can't possibly bring a case. So that's how it works. That's the explanation to the viewers.
So basically, then they can hold you and incarcerate you and torture you until you're too afraid to take a matter to court, and then release you. Or not release you at all. They can kill you, and there's no accountability. A lot of people have died in Guantanamo, and there's no accountability. Most Actually, I heard there may be an accountability coming up. It was on a news report yesterday that a document was released by Senate, I think it was, that shows that Bush and Cheney and them was guilty. So I'm waiting to see where that's going to go. Right now, I show that it is 1:30. Would you like to continue a little further, or do you need to go ahead and go?
Well, Royce, it's fun to talk to you. I've enjoyed it, but I have so much to do, and this is my third interview of the day, and I'm
tired.
I'm tired, but I'm also way behind in my writing. Ever so many things are happening constantly, and I have to produce explanations that my readers are waiting for on my website, and it's just not enough time to do everything I need to do. You have a good program. I've enjoyed talking to you. You're a very well keyed-in person. You don't have any illusions, and I'm sure your audience finds you a huge help. If you'd like to have me on again sometime, we can arrange that. I'm pleased to talk to you again. I'd like to keep it, though, to 30 minutes because everything else you got going on, which I do understand. Plus just getting through life itself. I'll be honest with you, yes, I would love to have you return sometime because I feel like we don't even scratch the surface, especially with everything I see getting posted to Facebook. I mean, there's some outspoken people out there. So, as a matter of fact, I'm working on getting some filmmakers that's doing documentaries about some of this stuff, and that's going to be coming up between now and October. But at any rate, I'm going to go ahead and cut you loose since I know you got a lot to do, and let you and me stay in touch. Well, I'll be glad to come back always, Royce. Okay, sounds like a winner. I look forward to it. All right, you have a good one. Okay, goodbye. Bye-bye. Well, folks, I got to tell you, what the man was saying certainly sounded interesting to me, but unfortunately we just did not have enough time to go into other questions, like, for example, what would he recommend that we as the public do to make changes? That would have been a question. If I had time, I would have made sure I would have asked them. I do know there are several grassroots movements out there that are trying to make a difference. In fact, I'm working on getting a filmmaker from the new documentary coming out that's called Zero Tolerance, and we're going to come on the air and talk about that thing I mentioned earlier when I was talking to Paul about how the zero tolerances went from the benign there to cover everybody from shootings to the police state school, you might want to call it, that we have now today. I'm also working on one that I haven't heard back from yet. They got a DVD coming out called Bought that deals with Big Brother and the pharmacy industry, and how they're buying and paying for. I think it's, if I understood their media kit right, the government and the corrupt politicians. And I am sticking my foot in my mouth. I do apologize for that. So we do intend to kind of talk about that. I also want to let everybody know that I am going to be looking for more people on similar topics in the near future. Right now I'm booked up until October, so these people are going to be sprinkled in here and there as I find them. So I can't promise a show next week about a particular given topic unless it's already on my schedule, of course, which actually I do have next week covered. And here in about another 20 minutes, we're going to be joined by David Roundtree and Robbie Luntz.
And we're going to be discussing their newest book, Demon Street, and it covers a haunting and a poltergeist activity investigation that they've been doing in a house. I think it's in Florida, if I understood it correctly. I got the book, but I sadly did not have time to get very far into reading it because I got it, too close to showtime for it to do me a lot of good. But basically, David Roundtree, he's an old friend of mine, internet friend. I've known him for many years. He's been on my show a couple of times. I know the man to be a scientist that's been investigating ghosts and hauntings through a scientific process for many years. Recently, however, it's been brought to my attention that he's also a Lakota shaman of coyote medicine. So we got an interesting mixture here with David, at least, about how he approaches the paranormal through scientific as well as mystical means, you might say. And some of the things that I did get a chance to read in the book was pretty freaky. It dealt with the stove dancing a jig, the floor bubbling up and rolling and knocking people into the air. It sounds like pretty heavy-duty poltergeist activity. And I'm actually going to ask David and Robbie, when I get them here in a few minutes, if anybody involved was going to be a adolescent or young adult, early 20s type of thing, because I know that Michael Clarkson did some investigation into this poltergeist activity, and what he was finding in many cases was that there was adolescents and early young adults in there where this stuff was occurring, and when they grew up, the activity stopped. So what I'm thinking and what he thought is that this, rather than being poltergeist activity, as in a ghostly or demonic spirit actually moving things, it could be more a case of mind over matter, where the mind is actually moving it. And perhaps maybe when you're younger, your emotions run higher, you get more frustrated, especially given whatever type of mind you got. Maybe perhaps you have some young adolescents have telepathic abilities that maybe they lose when they get older, in other words, and they're actually making these things happen. Is that right? Who knows? But one theory is as good as